It was a time of festival at the monastery, and at that time it was usual that the meditation hall was to be adorned with flowers and greenery. So a monk carried in a pot plant and presented himself to the master, who was sitting in quiet contemplation. And he said to the master, "Master, where should I place the plant?" And the master said, "Drop it." So the acolyte dropped the pot plant at his feet. Then he said, "But master, where should I put it?" "Drop it." "But I already dropped it." "Drop it!" In that moment, the young acolyte was enlightened. What is it that's present when stillness and movement meet? What is our relationship with life now? And what is the nature of emptiness? Are all questions that we're endeavoring to answer still. On Tuesday, several stories were told that give us the possibility of answering all three. Let's see what they do for us today. The first is that story of the follower of Buddhism who venerated the great godly saint Ashoka. So in his longing to see and have communion with this saint, he decided to drop all his worldly activities and go to the mountain to meditate, to invoke. And while he was up in the mountain, he chanted and he prayed and he participated in the rituals which were said to be invocative. But after 12 long years, he still had not even caught a glimmer of this great being. So, feeling disheartened, he came down the mountain and made his way into the town. But on his way into town, he saw a man sitting in his doorway with a piece of steel on his hand and rubbing it with a feather. And so he approached the man and he said, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "Oh, I'm a tailor and I'm making a needle so that I can ply my trade." And of course, the seeker thought to himself, this man in a whole lifetime is not going to be able to make a needle from this piece of steel, and yet he's still diligently working. Look at me, I gave up. And so back up the mountain he went, and he sat and continued to invoke and pray and chant. And again a number of years passed without success. So he made his way down the mountain once again. And again, walking into town, he saw a man who was digging a hill, and he'd only made a very small inroads, but he was still shoveling away at the dirt, and he asked him, "What are you doing?" The man said, "Well, this hill is blocking the sunshine from my house, so I'm removing the hill." And of course the seeker thought, in lifetimes this man is not going to be able to achieve his goal, and look at me. So back up the mountain he goes again, and again for a number of years he meditates and prays and invokes. And again without success, and this time totally disillusioned, he came down the mountain and was walking into town when on the side of the road he saw a dog. Its rear end was completely shattered. Maybe it had been hit by a wagon, or it was diseased. But with maggots crawling and eating at its hind quarters, it was yapping and barking at the passers-by. And the seeker thought to himself, look at this creature, so much in pain and so disabled, and yet it continues to follow its nature. And with that, a great wave of compassion flowed over him. And being a Buddhist, he wanted to alleviate the suffering of the dog. But of course, the Buddhist belief is non-himsa, non-hurting, so he could not, at the same time as assisting the dog, do damage to the maggots that were eating its quarters. So the only thought that he had was to remove the maggots with his tongue. So he knelt down beside the dog, and closing his eyes to block out the ghastly scene of the pus and the gore, and he placed his tongue down towards the hind quarters. But instead of reaching what he thought were maggots, his tongue tasted sand. So he opened his eyes. But as he opened his eyes, his vision was filled with a great effulgence, a great light. And as he looked, there, standing before him, was the great godly saint Ashoka. And the seeker said, why have you not appeared to me before now, after all of these years of invoking your presence? And the saint said, your act of compassion has removed the veil of karma which covered your perception, and has now allowed you to see me. But if you doubt your perception, put me on your shoulder and take me into town. And this is what the seeker did. But when he reached the town, everyone he met, he asked, what do I have on my shoulder? And they all thought he was mad, so they hurried away, except one old woman who said, you've got the rotting carcass of an old dog on your shoulder. Her karma had been bought sufficiently to allow her to see this. The second story is that also that seeker after truth. And he learned that a great llama was coming to his village. So taking the white scarf that was the gift that's given in reverence, he lined with a number of people waiting. And finally he came into the presence of the great llama, placing the scarf around his neck. And in answer to the question from the Lama, what is it that you're seeking? He said, I'm seeking enlightenment and truth. Tell me, what should I do? And the Lama said, oh, drop all of your worldly life and go to the mountains and meditate and follow these practices. And he gave him a mantra and certain rituals to follow. So the man went up the mountain, and he followed the practices assiduously, day after day, month after month, year after year, but no sign of enlightenment came. So after 30 years, one of the villagers who used to bring alms to the seeker told him that the great llama was again visiting their village. So descending from his cave, he came down again with a white scarf and in line with all those waiting. And when he came face to face with the llama, he told him, "I've been doing as you told me for all of these years, and still no sign of enlightenment has come." The Lama said, "What did I tell you?" So the man related. The Lama said, Oh, I was completely wrong. Oh, now you'll never get enlightened." The man was totally and completely shattered. What could he do? His whole life was now his cave, his meditation, his rituals. So his only thought was to go back to doing what he always had done for these 30 years. So he made his way up the mountain and went into his cave. There, the rocks of his cave danced with life. Every moat was filled with dancing light and life. He stood up and walked out and looked down into the village, and there it again was filled with that which he could feel within his own being, aliveness. What's the similarity, or the difference, or something more in these stories? From our own experience, only from our own experience can we answer these questions or understand. What's the similarity or the difference between these two for you?
Seeking you shall not find.
Seeking you shall not find. And yet we have a paradox. If we don't seek, we have no chance of finding. But what is the commonality in these two? Certainly the difference is, in one, a wave of compassion rolls over the seeker, but in the other, excuse me, there's no such. But what's behind these two? How has it been for us? What's preceded every revelation, every epiphany that we've had? Look at your path. Remember. those moments of desolation and hopelessness, those moments of wretchedness.
Letting go of the outcome, dropping any expectations.
Yes. But in those moments, expectation was not there, do you think? In the abject state of hopelessness and wretchedness, is there a filament of hope and expectation? No. There was just that, wasn't it? The dropping.
Something moves from a different place. Where there's, I suppose, trust, for want of a better word.
Yes.
So it's just spontaneous.
Absolutely.
And the fellow with the acolyte with the dog, he because his master, I heard it this time, I think, that the master said, if you doubt
Yes.
that you are seeing,
Yes.
put me on your shoulder, and he put him on his shoulder, so he didn't trust.
That's right.
He didn't trust.
No.
And then comes, there's a place nowhere left to go.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what he said. She just pretends she's got, is it?
But what followed these experiences? We cannot say definitively enlightenment. What follows these experiences? What arises out of them?
Clean windows. I always wanted to clean windows when I came out of those.
All right.
That took a few years to click that it was symbolic of
Yes.
the
Yes.
clearing of that. The
Ah.
place seemed different.
Aha.
More clearly.
Yes. So we have an opportunity, a possibility of answering these three questions with these two stories. What is it that happens when stillness and movement meet? What is our relationship with life now? And what is the nature of emptiness? Life.
They come, it's both lives,
Uh-huh.
emptiness, it comes.
Okay.
It brings you back to that circle of
Where stillness and movement meet. But maybe we need to ponder on them a while. And the old abbot saying to the acolyte, drop it. Drop it. Drop it. When we've dropped it, what then is there to drop? And we know. Expectation, the thread of hope. Anticipation.
To share something, I when you've asked those questions before, I sort of, came in and out of that question, and one day there I thought, well, what's there? And then the word observer.
Uh-huh.
So- And I actually looked the word up in the dictionary.
Yes.
And one of it was, to see and this sort of thing. It was also to follow.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Little. Yes.
A good and apt description of observer.
Uh-huh.
Because from that stillness of seeing comes
The movement, yes, out of that inevitably. Mm.
I remember one time I was talking to you and you asked me a question. I don't know what the question was, but I answered, I don't know. And you said, oh, good.
That's the answer I was looking for.